Within Inkscape, there are a lot of features that are hidden within the menus. Today I'm going to be going over one of those features. I am of course referring to the creating tiled clones. Hello my friends, welcome back to another Inkscape tutorial. Rob here from Button Press Graphics, and today I'm going to be taking you over the creating tiled clones. Now before I continue, let me apologise for the lack of uploads. It has been a nightmare couple of weeks. Well, personal issues that I will not go into over the internet, but suffice to say, I am trying my best to get back to it. And I would also like to mention that there is a creative corner coming up later in the video, so please stick around for that. But without further ado, let's get started. Now, of course, when it comes to creating tiled clones, you have to have something that you want to clone. For this, I'm just going to go with a simple square. Now we've created a simple square, I'm going to create a little hexagon, because what I want to do next is I just want to cut this little shape out from one corner. This is going to make it a lot easier for you to tell what I am doing when I am showing you the steps for creating tiled clones. And just like that, we now have a square with a hexagon cut out from the bottom right corner. So with that done, we are now going to go to Edit, scroll down to where it says Clone, and then come across to Create Tiled Clones. When you do, you will get this menu that opens. Now, before I go any further, I want to explain this little section to you here. Now, these are my default settings. We've got width and height. That means it will keep on creating clones until you get to the limits of whatever width and height that you set. This is perfect when you have a picture that you want to fill with the clones. Or you can select rows and columns. This will give you a specific amount of clones, so 40 rows and 40 columns, as you can see with mine. Then at the bottom, all the settings that you have made, you can reset with this button right here. This will reset across all of the different tabs, and it will scale them down to 0, so the default settings. If you also create some clones and you don't want them anymore, you can click Remove. And Unclump is going to spread out any of the clones that could possibly overlap. If I was to set these down to, say, 4 instead of 40, when I hit create, we will have 4 clones going across and 4 going down. What I also want to do is I want to add a slight gradient to this. So I'm going to go to my fill and stroke menu, and you do not have to do this. This is just to show you the creating tiled clones. But what I want to do is give you a visual representation of what is actually happening. So I'm going to turn the opacity all the way up on this, and I'm going to slightly change the color to something that's easy to distinguish like this. Now back in my Create Tiled Clones menu. Now with just simple translation, if I hit create with 4 rows and 4 columns, you will get something that looks like this. Now we still have the original right here. So these are all clones of the original. And any changes you make to the original will also be made to the rest. Now let's remove that. That was a simple translation. That means it will do nothing with the shape except clone it and do as many rows and columns as you have set here, or it will keep on repeating that same pattern until you get to the end of whatever you put in your width and height. However, if we open this drop down, you will be confronted with a list of all these options and you won't have a clue what they do. Well, let me break it down for you. The only ones you really need to take notice of are these top 4, because every single one underneath that is a combination of these top 4. So for example, we've got simple translation, 180 degrees rotation, reflection and glide reflection. But from this point down, we have all the different iterations of each. So we have reflection and reflection. We have reflection and 180 degree rotation, and so on and so forth. But let's say we go with the standard 180 degree rotation. Now when we hit create, as you can see, it has a different effect. The different effect is simply Inkscape taking the original piece, and if we was to select it again, and then we was to turn this round using the rotation handles, as you can see, this one is exactly like this one. And if we turned it another 180 degrees, it would return back to normal. So as you can see, it is going from one row to the next, and it is rotating 180 degrees each time. Now let's take reflection. Hit create, and as you can see, slightly different. Instead of rotating them around, it has put them next to it and reflected as if there was a mirror right here in between the two. And then as we come along, it's done the same again. Finally, we have glide reflection. Now, as you can see, this, instead of going from the vertical aspect of one row being the same, next row being different, and then back to the start and then different again, we have it going in a horizontal line instead, going from left to right. So that is pretty much what all 4 of these will do. But for now, I'm just going to use simple translation because it's a lot easier to visually represent what I am doing when I'm doing it. So let's move on to the first of the tabs, Shift. Now this can look a little bit daunting, but all you need to remember is Shift X is going to always control the left and right. Shift Y will always control up and down. Then these are separated into their columns per row, per column, and of course randomize. Now all of these values are going to be a percentage, so from 0 to 100%. So I could go into detail about how it works and what is happening, but I also want to show you visually so you can get a really good idea of how it works. Now I'm just going to zoom in slightly, and just for now I'm going to leave it as 4 rows and 4 columns. Now what you need to know is each one of these tabs is going to do something different. The first one is Shift. This is going to shift your objects left and right or up and down. The scale is going to increase or decrease with every single row. And the rotation, again, is going to control the rotation of your clones. Then you have blur and opacity. It means with every row it can get either more blurred or it can be more opaque. And then with color, you can change your color as you will go along. So with any combination of these, you can create some really interesting results. But for example, I'm just going to show you all the settings and what they do for this tutorial. So with Shift, we are going to keep with 4 by 4, and I'm going to use Shift X, so the left and right values per row. So let's go with 100% just to show you what will happen. Now all this means is for every row going down, it will shift 100%. That means towards the right. If we went minus 100%, it would go to the left. Let me show you. We're going to hit create. And as you can see, every single row has still got 4 shapes. 4 here, 4 here, 4 here, and again at the bottom. But as you can see, each row has moved to the right 100%. So if we was to undo and then make this 50% instead, let's do it again. And as you can see, it's only moved 50%. So this, in essence, is how Shift works. So let's go with columns as well. I've undone that. I'm going to hit reset to get all the values back to normal. And then we're going to go with column. Now, of course, this is per column. It's going to move along 50% to the right. So set at 50% with 4 rows, 4 columns, hit create. And as you can see, with every single column, it has moved the boxes 50%. But because they are all stacked on top of each other, we now have this staggering effect with a 50% gap in between each of the rows. So for argument's sake, let's say we mix the two. We have them going 50% across per row and 50% down on the columns. So say we wanted 50% going across per row and 50% per column. With these settings, you will get something that looks more like this. As you can see, each row has still moved across 50%, but with each column going down, they have also moved 50%, and you can get this staggered effect. So this is pretty much how every single one of these will work. Of course, you've heard me say it hundreds of times at this point. Get creative. Go and experiment for yourself. Now, when it comes to the exponent, it says whether the rows are spaced evenly, being 1, converge with each other, being less than 1, or diverge, being more than 1. Let's say we go to 1.1 on both, like this. And then we create our clones. As you can see, there is no Shift X, no Shift Y values, and no randomize put anywhere. It is just the exponent. This is the base. And if you create, as you can see, it gives you the first clone coming in both directions, but then from then on, it will give you a gap. And then with every subsequent gap, it will get wider. So this will stagger how much they space out as you get further and further away from the original clone. So next, for alternate, I am going to reset everything, and I am going to, of course, go with Shift Y because we used Shift X last time. Let's go with Y. I'm going to hit 50%, and now I'm going to select alternate. Now with alternate selected, we hit create, and as you can see, it shifted the next row down 50%, but then the alternate has made it go back to its original value. So for every second row, it is creating this 50% difference. But for the first, third, fifth, and so on, it is going to revert back to the normal values, which was Shift Y of 0. That is how alternate works. So let's reset everything there. Use the columns instead. Again, 50%. I'm just going to undo them. And then we're going to hit create. And now, as you can see, it's happened again, but this time using columns rather than the rows. So Shift Y, for every column along, it's going to go down 50%. And of course, if I did minus 50, it would go up 50%. Let's go back, hit alternate, and then recreate them. And now, as you can see, it zigzags up and down, enabling you to make things like brickwork, for example. Next is cumulate. Now let's stick with the shift Y of 50. Cumulate is going to add all of the values up. So in this case, we're on shift 50%. With each column, because that's what it's under, this column section here, with each column, it's going to increase by adding up all of the values. The best way I can show you is by showing you. Let's hit create. Now, if I zoom out, as you can see, we have the 50 gap right here. On the next row, it takes this 50 gap along with the next 50 gap and then adds it to the adds that to the value. It will add more and more and more. And as you can see, the gap increases every single time. Lastly, we have exclude tile. Now, when you exclude the tile, it gives you a slightly different effect. The best way I can show you, again, is by showing you. So what this has done is it has excluded all the values that you have put. Well, when we highlight, as you can see, it says exclude the tile width in shift. And the same can be added right here, exclude the tile height in shift. So this has got rid of any of the changes that you have made to the width, which means per column, it is going to just show you the original. It's not going to move along each time. And alternatively, using the exclude tile on this side will stop it from going down as well. But these are all of the options that you will see across all of these. The angle for rotation is exactly what it says. You just change the angle instead of the X and Y values. The angle being between 0 and 360 degrees. Then for blur and opacity, you can increase the blur per row or the opacity per row, or you can reduce it too. So let me show you exactly what I mean with the blur, because this is a really cool effect, especially when you're trying to stagger the blur effect really convincingly. So say we stick on 6 by 6, we put the blur up to increase, let's say 10% each time. So for every row going down, it will have 10% more blur with each row. Now when we hit create, as you can see, the top row is absolutely perfect with no blur. Then we have 10% blur on the next row, then 20, then 30, 40, 50, and so on. Now if we was to do the same on opacity, instead of just blurring completely, you're going to find that it will also fade out as well, like so. So lastly, the one option I haven't covered is randomize. Now randomize is exactly what it says. If you put a 50% value, it will randomize the value between -50 to +50. Now the best way that I can show you the randomize is by going to scale. Scale is the best visual representation that I can give you so you know what randomize will do. Now let's say we want 50% on the scale X and 50% on the scale Y. So with each row and column now, out of the 6 rows and 6 columns, as it goes across and down, each one is going to be either up to 50% smaller or 50% larger. And when you hit create, you will get something that looks like this. And there you go. We have the original shape right here, and then one that looks like it's almost 50% smaller one that's slightly bigger. I think this one is about as low as you're going to go. 50% is right here, and this one here. And when it comes to the large ones, I think this one is probably the biggest one. That's 50% bigger. Now again, if you want to unclump, press unclump, and you can keep pressing it, and this will spread them all out just like so. So now let's move on to the most difficult one, trace. Now, as you can see on screen, I've created just this rectangle with a few hexagons of different colors over the top. The rectangle is a very light grey, then we've got a darker grey coming with these two pieces, and of course light blue and a darker blue over the top. Now I've just grouped all of these together, as you can see in the bottom info bar right here, a group of 5 objects in layer 1, and all I'm going to use this as is our trace box. Now this gives me a good little hint for you, because as you can see I have rows and columns 6 by 6. Now what I want to do is I want to use width and height, and the reason I want to do this is because I can now set the parameters of the clones to be within this box. Now with this selected, if we come up to the top bar, you can see that the width is 1170 pixels and the height is 685. So that's what I am going to put right here in these boxes. That's 1170 for the width and 685 for the height. And now I'm going to pick a clone. Now what I mean by this is I am going to use a little circle. So just by creating a symmetrical circle. Now of course I've created the circle, and this can be any shape that you want, but you need to be aware that the more complex the shape is, the more nodes you are going to use. This trace feature is going to be very demanding on your hardware. Now, as you are probably aware, with each circle you have 4 nodes, top, bottom, left and right. Well, if you was to use one of these, for example, you are now using 6 nodes instead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Them 2 nodes might not seem like a lot. Say you was to copy this 100 times with 10 rows, 10 columns. It wouldn't seem like much, but then 4 nodes have now just multiplied into 400 nodes. So you need to be aware that when you have thousands of clones, each with their own nodes, the more nodes there are, the harder it will be for your hardware to keep up. Now, as you can see, I've just made this one quite small, and the reason I've done that is just so I can put this in the top left corner. So I'm going to select this, hold shift, select this group here, and then I'm going to use my align distribute menu, which can be found right here on the right hand side toolbar, to bring open this one. Now I'm going to change the drop down to last selected, and I'm going to use these 2 buttons here, so I can line up the left edges like so, and then the top edges like so, and this will put it up into the top left corner. That is absolutely perfect for what I want. Now I'm going to deselect everything, select just the circle, and go back to my creating tile clones menu. Now we're going to go to trace, and I'm going to give you a quick overview. Now when it comes to the second part, this one here, I'm not going to go into detail on that because you don't really need to change it, and I am just going to glance over these options here because for what I am trying to show you right now, they're not really needed. One thing that is definitely needed though is this button right here. If you do not use this button, it will not trace the picture that is underneath the clones. So make sure that you have this selected and checked. Now on the base level, all you have to do is select what you want to use, tweak the selected value if you want to tweak the selected value, and once it's picked what it wants to use, how are you going to change it? You can get some really cool effects with these, but for now I'm just going to show you that when it says pick from the drawing, I want it to pick the colors. So I want it to take particular attention to the gray area here, these blue shapes and these darker gray shapes. That is what I want it to be picking up. But you can also pick up the opacity of objects. You can also pick up just the reds, just the greens, and just the blues. Alternatively, you can pick up the hues, the saturation, or the lightness. But for now, I'm going to go with the colors. That means that this little black circle is only going to change dependent on the color that's underneath it for every single clone. Now I'm going to come down to here, apply the value to the clones. This is what I want to change in relation to the color. So I want the size to change. Presence means whether there will be a clone or not. Again, you can change the color dependent on what's underneath. That means that these clones will try and match the color that is underneath and change it in that respect. And finally, the opacity. It will change the opacity of this clone dependent on what color is underneath. So a white color would make it completely transparent, whereas a black color underneath it will make it completely opaque. And anything in between on the spectrum will dictate just how opaque it is. So as we can see, we have width and height already done right here. We have it set to the exact size that this picture underneath is, which means it will keep on creating clones, changing the size in relation to the color, but it will not go over the edges right here. So now we've got all our settings done. Let's hit create and wait a few seconds for it to actually work it out. And there you go. As you can see, now it has used this circle as the base. This is what it's going to clone. But as it clones over the grey areas, as you can see, they are all very, very small. Then as you get on the lighter shades, so this light blue and this light grey, these are going to start getting noticeably bigger. And then as you get to a much darker shape like these, the circles become way bigger and more prominent. And now if I select the shape on the picture underneath and move that out of the way and come back over, you can see the effect that it has. Now, if you have a PC that can stand it, then you can actually do some very, very interesting things, like creating a two-tone image using the tiled clones over a photograph, like you can see on screen right now. So as always, this has a lot to it, and by using a combination of symmetry, shift, scale, rotation, blur and opacity, color, you can actually get some really cool effects. But even if you want to trace a picture and have a really cool effect with all your clones in the background of a different project, that is the way to do it. And this is the Creative Corner, the section of my videos where I give you my advice as a professional designer to all you aspiring viewers out there who want to become a designer or an artist yourself. So without further ado, let's get on with today's. This week I was sent an impressive design by Colin King, one of the fellow viewers, and I am really impressed. This is a really good way to improve on your skills. Take an old advert or a poster or something along those lines and see if you can't recreate it yourself using, of course, Inkscape. That's exactly what Colin tried to do, and Colin King, you have done an amazing job. As you can see on the left hand side, we have the original. It looks kind of dated, like it has been picked up off a scrap heap. And on the right, we have a much cleaner, vibrant version of it. Now, of course, it is not perfect because Colin would be the first one to admit that he's not a professional designer. Little things like make thirst a pleasure on the bottom right of his image is not quite lined up and skewed in the correct way. However, for someone who is not a professional, I think he has done a remarkable job. There are other little instances that I think have been an improvement. For example, make thirst a pleasure. The text on the bottom left of the design now looks way more vibrant, and there is a much better contrast between the yellow and the black because of the letters being much thicker. Not only that, but there is also the text behind the first 3 bottles. That text is obscured, and I do not, as a designer, see any reason for it to be there. However, Colin has got rid of it and not included it in his redesign, and I think the image looks far better. But of course, this is where you can have your say. What do you think? Please let Colin know exactly what you think to his design, because I think as a professional designer, he has done a wonderful job. Is it perfect? No, but he is not a professional, so why would it be? So if you want to send in your designs, you can do so by sending them to buttonpressgraphics@gmail.com. I love to see them, and I will always give you my personal, honest advice. Did you know that you can become a member of the Button Press Graphics YouTube channel? Well, now you do. You will get a lot of added benefits, and you will directly support the channel, enabling me to make much better content in the future. Also, you can send in your artwork into the Creative Corner. This is a regular section where I will showcase your work in a future video. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to bid you all a fond farewell, and I will see you next time.